At the start of the movie, we meet Tai-sik, a former gangster who's just been released from prison. He's headed back to his hometown, determined to leave his old life behind. But let's be real, once a legend, always a legend. He's still feared and respected in the town he used to rule. As he makes his way back, Tai-sik is seen jotting down notes in a tiny notebook, like a grocery list for life goals. He's got all the little things he wants to do in there, like finally trying that new coffee shop, or maybe not breaking anyone's bones today. When he arrives in his hometown, he heads straight to his adoptive mother's restaurant. She's affectionately known as the Sunflower Lady around town. Her daughter, Huiju, tells Tai-sik to come back later since her mom isn't home. Tai-sik, looking like a lost puppy, says he has nowhere else to go. So Huiju suggests he hit up a sauna. Tai-sik takes her advice and heads to a nearby sauna, where he gets completely fascinated by the automatic lock. He plays with it like a kid with a new toy, annoying some guy who's just trying to relax. The guy, in a classic "I'm too tired for this" tone, tells Tai-sik to knock it off. Tai-sik apologizes, but when he takes off his shirt and reveals his full-body tattoo, the guy's mood changes quicker than a channel surfing remote. Meanwhile, in another part of town, two cops are watching a thug beat up a woman in broad daylight. But instead of stepping in, they decide it's a good time to practice their "let's pretend we didn't see anything" act, since the thug works for a gangster named Chung Moo. They drive off like nothing happened. Chung Moo, on the other hand, is busy in a club, dishing out some punishment to a traitor. Everyone in town is terrified of him, but what most don't know is that he used to be Tai-sik's lackey before Tai-sik went to prison. With nowhere else to go, Tai-sik drops by to see his old buddy, Chung Moo. Chung Moo is surprised to see him, but still shows him respect, welcoming him to the bar. Tai-sik, however, isn't interested in the shady business and leaves as soon as he arrives. Next, Tai-sik pays a visit to another gangster in town, a guy named Yankee, because of course there's always a Yankee. Yankee pretends to be happy to see him, but as soon as Tai-sik leaves, he tells his right-hand man to keep tabs on him. Tai-sik finally makes it back to the Sunflower Lady's restaurant and is warmly greeted by his adoptive mother. She's thrilled to have her son back, but Huiju is confused since she's never met him before. During dinner, Tai-sik's mother feeds him with her hands, which makes Huiju a bit jealous. Later, Huiju takes Tai-sik up to the terrace and lays down some ground rules if he wants to stay in the house. Tai-sik, being the gentleman he is, quietly agrees to everything she says. In the next scene, we're introduced to a politician named Cho Ponsu. He's a corrupt guy who's plotting to build a shopping mall in an area where a lot of locals live. Because why not? It's not like people need their homes or anything. He pretends to be nice and caring, but as soon as he's out of sight, he insults people for being gullible enough to believe him. Meanwhile, Tai-sik visits a doctor's clinic because he wants to remove all his body tattoos. They remind him too much of his past. However, the doctor tells him it's going to cost a fortune and will leave scars behind. Disappointed, Tai-sik heads home. Later that day, the Sunflower Lady storms into the office of politician Cho Ponsu, screaming and cursing up a storm. It turns out he wants to buy her land to build a shopping mall, but she's not having any of it. She boldly threatens him to back off and then leaves like a boss. That night, Tai-sik and Huiju meet on the terrace. She bosses him around, completely unaware that he used to be a gangster. Tai-sik doesn't call her out for being rude and just goes along with what she says. The next day, while Tai-sik is working in the garage, the two policemen from earlier spot him. They reminisce about all the trouble Tai-sik used to cause before he went to prison. A flashback shows us that Tai-sik was the top dog in town a few years ago. Current gangsters Chung Moo and Yankee were his lackeys, following in his footsteps. But after Tai-sik got locked up, they both tried to take his place, turning them into rivals. Seeing an opportunity, Cho Ponsu used them to climb the political ladder and take control. Now the gangsters work under him, constantly competing with each other. Meanwhile, Huiju is struggling with calculus in her math class. After class, Tai-sik comes to pick her up, but her math teacher catches his eye. They step aside to chat, and it turns out Tai-sik and she used to date a long time ago. Tai-sik thanks her for always being kind to him and then leaves. Later, while Tai-sik and Huiju are enjoying some street food, a guy who's obsessed with Huiju starts a fight with Tai-sik for supposedly hitting on his girl. The guy drags Tai-sik to an abandoned building and, along with his friends, gives him a beating. They only stop when they notice the intimidating tattoos all over Tai-sik's body. Back at home, Tai-sik applies ointment to his wounds. Huiju feels guilty that he had to suffer because of her. Meanwhile, Cho Ponsu is having a meeting with both Chung Moo and Yankee. He's just opened the biggest club in town, called the Oracle, and wants one of them to manage it. Both gangsters are eager to get their hands on the club, which only heightens the tension between them. Cho Pon-soo declares that whoever can get him the Sunflower Lady's restaurant will be given the job. The very next day, Chung-moo and his henchmen show up at the restaurant and start wrecking the place. But as soon as Chung-moo sees Tae-sik, he orders everyone to stop. For the first time, Tae-sik loses his cool and grabs Chung-moo by the throat, demanding to know what his intentions are. His mother comes out and makes the thugs leave. Tae-sik asks her what they wanted, but she brushes it off. The gangsters meet the next day and decide to team up to get Tae-sik out of town. But Tae-sik, on the other hand, is loving his crime-free life. He helps Hui-ju with her high school math and even mentions that he wants to go to college next year. Hui-ju realizes that Tae-sik is actually really smart when he easily solves some of the toughest math problems. That night, Tae-sik comes home with a gift for his mother that he bought with his first paycheck. They share an emotional hug. Then Tae-sik gives Hui-ju a camera she's always wanted. At first, she acts like she doesn't want it, so Tae-sik keeps the camera for himself. Later that night, Hui-ju hands Tae-sik a cup of tea, giving him that hopeful look that says, "Please tell me you didn't forget." Tae-sik finally hands her the gift, and she walks away happier than a kid with a new puppy. Afterward, Tae-sik crosses off the buy gifts note in his trusty little notebook with a satisfied grin. The next day, the family heads out for a picnic by the lake. They eat, sing, and have a blast. Tae-sik even attempts a dad joke, but it's so bad that everyone just laughs at how terrible it is. That night, Tae-sik gets an unexpected visit from his old enemy, Byung-jin. It's like running into your high school bully at the grocery store, awkward and full of tension. Byung-jin calmly advises Tae-sik to move somewhere else with his family because Cho Pon-soo will stop at nothing to get their land. Meanwhile, Yankee spies are lurking in the shadows like nosy neighbors, reporting everything back to their boss. Yankee quickly calls Chung-moo over to discuss this new twist. They suspect that Cho Pon-soo has sent Byung-jin to make Tae-sik hand over the restaurant. If Byung-jin succeeds, he might snag the Oracle Club for himself. So they hatch a plan to force Tae-sik and his family out of the restaurant. Stat. Next, we see Tae-sik and Hui-ju at the hospital, getting one of Tae-sik's tattoos removed. He's finally saved up enough cash for the procedure. On their way home, they grab some street food because nothing says bonding time like eating skewers from a sketchy vendor. They even talk about going to the same college next year because who doesn't want to keep their ex-gangster buddy around on campus? While Tae-sik is at work, Chung-moo and his thugs storm into the restaurant and start smashing things up. This time they cross the line by roughing up Tae-sik's mother and tossing her to the ground. Hui-ju bravely tries to stop them by hitting one on the head, but she's shoved aside. She sprints to the garage to get Tae-sik, but by the time they return, the thugs are long gone. Furious, Tae-sik storms into Cho Pon-soo's office and threatens him to stay away from his family. Cho Pon-soo tries to sweet-talk him into becoming a business partner, but Tae-sik isn't buying it and shuts him down faster than a sketchy pop-up ad. Yankee, on the other hand, comes up with a sneaky plan to send Tae-sik back to prison. He sends some men to beat Tae-sik up, hoping he'll fight back and get himself arrested. He even bribes 2 cops to be ready to pounce. But when the thugs show up and start wailing on Tae-sik, he doesn't react, just stands there like he's in some twisted version of a silent film. The plan falls flat, and the thugs drive off, frustrated. That evening, Tae-sik is at home, telling his mother about the day's events when Hui-ju's stalker shows up. He mocks Tae-sik for getting beat up without fighting back and brings up the death of someone named Dopal. The mention of Dopal clearly hits a nerve for both Tae-sik and his mother. We learn that Dopal was the Sunflower Lady's biological son, who was killed by Tae-sik. Hui-ju overhears the conversation and is shocked. Later that night, her mother explains that she visited Tae-sik in prison after her son's death. Tae-sik had cried and seemed genuinely regretful. The more she visited him, the more she realized Tae-sik needed a mother's love, so she decided to adopt him. Hui-ju then meets Tae-sik on the rooftop and tells him she forgives him because, as it turns out, her brother used to beat their mother for money. It's a bittersweet moment, like finding out the guy who dented your car just paid for your lunch. The next morning, the Sunflower Lady prints out pages from Dopal's diary, which he kept before his death. As she reads it, she discovers that 10 years ago, Cho Pon-soo sent Dopal to kill Tae-sik. The fight that followed led to Dopal's death and Tae-sik's imprisonment. If the media gets hold of this diary, it'll be game over for Cho Pon-soo's political career. The mother blackmails him to leave her family alone, but Cho Pon-soo isn't someone who knows how to back off. Now that the mother has crossed a line, he plans to end her for good. The next day, Hui-ju is returning home from school when her stalker hits her with a brick and gets away on his bike. He has also joined forces with Cho Pon-soo and is now on his team. Tae-sik and his mother rush to the hospital, where they find that Hui-ju hasn't regained consciousness, and the left side of her face is swollen. After this, the mother loses all hope and decides to sell the restaurant, valuing her family's safety above all else and blaming herself for Huiju's condition. Taesik goes to meet Cho Ponsu and the gangsters to tell them that they are finally leaving. The man insults him and demands that he cut off his arm for his family's safety. Taesik is ready to sacrifice his arm, but at the last minute, Cho Ponsu stops his men and lets Taesik go. Taesik returns to the hospital, unaware that Yankee and Chong Mu are on their way to his house to kill his mother. Cho Ponsu doesn't want her to spread the news about his past, so he orders her to be eliminated. The gangsters strangle her to death and stage it to look like a suicide. When Taesik returns home, he is beyond devastated at the sight. He cries, holding his mother's limp body in his arms. Huiju is still in the hospital, so Taesik has to handle the funeral alone. In the next few days, their restaurant is also destroyed and the land is taken. However, because of an earring found on the floor of his mother's room, Taesik figures out that the gangsters were the ones who killed her. Meanwhile, Cho Ponsu and the others are at the grand opening of Club Oracle. A furious Taesik crashes the party and demands to know who threw the rock at Huiju. The stalker steps forward himself. Taesik spares Byung-jin, telling him to leave because he is the only one worthy of life in that room. Byung-jin thanks him and walks outside. Following that, Taesik starts killing everyone who stands in his way. He sets the place on fire and takes on 50 of Cho Ponsu's men alone. He kills most of them, but is severely injured in the process. Still, he manages to strangle Chong Mu and Yankee to death, just as they had done to his mother. Finally, he kills Cho Ponsu and takes his revenge. Moments later, Taesik also dies from his injuries. Some years later, Huiju is in college and is doing better than ever. In Taesik's remembrance, she writes her goals in life in his notebook. That's it for today's video. Make sure to like and subscribe to watch more interesting recap videos. Thanks for watching.